You all ever heard of munging? Hello and welcome to Spoiler Alert. I am your host Ned, and joining me is my co-host Kyle.
Hello, everybody.
Yeah, no special guest this time.
Nobody
Bit of a
likes
lie, just couldn't
us.
find one in time.
Nobody likes us anymore. Nobody does.
Sad reacts only. Yes, and today we're not going to be talking about E3 because shit goes wrong, people, and we're busy. Leave us alone.
We're going to get it out as fast as we can. We just got kicked up with a lot of audio shit. It's just not going the way we want. We know. We'll get it eventually, but, stuff happens, I guess.
I want to hopefully get that out by the end of this week or something, but for now, let's just talk Pixar because this is one that we're much more passionate about and one that we very much would like to do because we love Pixar. Who doesn't? Everyone does. Pixar are my daddy. I love you.
I have so much admiration for Pixar because, when you look at all the mainstream animation studios we got nowadays, which would include the likes of DreamWorks, Sony Pictures Animation, Illumination Entertainment, Blue Sky. Do you know what all of them have in common? They don't really give that much of a shit, honestly, do they?
Yeah, there's a lot of really, really bad animation companies out there, like the ones you've named, and more because obviously I work in a sort of a volunteer-run community type cinema. The amount of shitty animated films we get, oh my god, they're so forgettable and so
And I force myself to watch them because I'm a movie nerd who doesn't have anything better to do with his fucking time.
And I have to watch them because, let's be honest, it's my fucking job. Okay.
But what makes Pixar so special is that not only are they just a really great animation studio that have always shown in the past that they always care about story first and foremost, but at the same time, they are practically some of the most important figures in both animation and just general cinema because, well, they are the absolute pioneers of computer animation and have influenced not only the computer animated films we have today, for better or worse, but, it obviously contributes to a lot of the CGI we see in a lot of live action films and blockbusters today as well.
Yeah, I mean, they were really one of the first major companies to really sort of embrace full-on 3D.
I mean, other companies have tried and dabbled with it, but none to the extent that Pixar had. And even when they were a company that started out in the 80s, even before the first Toy Story came out, when they were just making shorts like Luxo Jr. and stuff like that, I mean, they knew the limitations that they had with computer animation at the time, but they just rolled with it. They developed their craft. They developed new software as they went on. And when you go through every single film bit by bit, year after year, you can see stuff slowly improving. Fur textures, models, obviously other effects like clouds, air, explosions. They're just masters of their craft.
They are absolutely fantastic. I mean, without them, we wouldn't have spawned this B-Tech Pixar, which is obviously DreamWorks, and then from there B-Tech DreamWorks, which is fucking Illumination.
DreamWorks started out as a really great animation studio because we got Prince of Egypt, Roger El Dorado, Shrek, actual good movies, and then
Somebody.
and then shit happened from there, really.
Yeah, they've still kind of released the odd good film, but let's be honest here, most of what they release is pretty shit.
Okay, should we move on to our first movie?
Yeah, let's do it. The first one we're going to be starting with today, because this is going to be a two-parter. I know that the first part of a second two-parter, when the second part of the first two-parter isn't up. It's confusing, but just go with it.
We promise we'll actually get it done.
Toy Story.
I love Toy Story so much, plain and simple. I mean, it's one of those films where, it's already a huge benchmark in computer animation already, because being the world's first computer animated film, there's so much that, we have to thank this film for what we see, in cinema today. But even then, when you take out the technical achievements that the film had, it wouldn't really mean shit if it didn't have a good script. And you know what? for a film which has such a weirdly childish concept about toys to come into life, Toy Story is a really fucking well written film.
Yeah, it absolutely is, and there's a reason why this film, of all the films, got has gotten two sequels. I know obviously Cars has, which we'll get to, but Pixar never ever uploads sequels to films ever, and the fact that Toy Story gets two and yet another one on the way. We are getting Toy Story 4, which we'll get around to probably in part two. The fact that we're getting all this, it just shows how beloved of a series it really is.
I mean, that's what I really like about it, and I think a lot of that really just comes down to the fact that, it's just a film. Even with the first film in particular, it has so many memorable characters, because even though Toy Story 1 focuses primarily on Woody and Buzz, at the end of the day, we know every single character well because they're so likable and charming and distinctive. Like, we all know Mr. Potato Head, Slinky, Bo Peep, Mrs. Potato Head, Sid the villain. There's something so memorable about them because, yeah, they have their own certain traits, but at the same time, they're just really charming and likable, and that just comes down to, again, just some really great voice acting as well.
Yeah, and obviously, as you said earlier, it's obviously one of the first big films that's utilized 3D animation and stuff, which is something that we cannot applaud you for enough, because this is just a fantastic thing.
And I really, when you actually look a lot behind the scenes, like the reason why they actually made Toy Story their first computer animated film, there's a lot of genuinely good thought processes, because back when Pixar first started out in the 80s and they were producing shorts at Lucasfilm, there was obviously a lot of limitations with computer animation because there wasn't really a way at the time to make skin look that good, and everything just sort of comes out like plastic. So the real logical step forward for a computer animated feature film is to basically make a movie where all its central characters are, well, plastic because they're toys. I love that. It's something that actually works to their advantage.
Very good idea. But yeah, Toy Story, what more can really be said? It's a fantastic story. It's held up surprisingly well considering it was like mid-90s that it came out. And it's just an overall fantastic film, really. There's not much more that can be said.
I also just need to mention that it's also a really excellently quotable movie. Like, there's a reason why the movie is memed so much or YouTube pooped so much, because, it's such a memorable film with so many memorable characters. And, I love a lot of the lines like, you stay away from Light Snack, he's mine. Or the word I'm searching for, I can't say, because there's preschool toys present. It's so much better than it needs any credit for, because a movie about toys coming to life could be shit, let's all be honest, but because Pixar stuck to their wits and actually cared about telling a good buddy film story, it's everything you could want. It's such a fantastic start to a great company moving forward.
It sounds like such a generic idea. Oh, Toys to Life, what a kids' film. You're wrong. You're fucking wrong. I think everyone at this point knows that.
I knew a lot of people, even the people at Disney, had many doubts over the project because of that alone. But, like I said before, they just stuck to their guns, and you know what? They made a good movie because they had full creative control.
It is a film that really sort of revolutionized everything that we come to know about films, today.
For better or worse.
Now moving on to A Bug's Life.
Oh boy, A Bug's Life. I think it's an okay film. Honestly, when you compare it to Toy Story and see that bridge between that film to this one, the gap in terms of technology evolution and especially storytelling isn't that high, because even though I do like the movie and I think there is a lot to admire about it, I think the thing that really holds the movie back is just that it's kind of lame, honestly.
Yeah, and this obviously is what sort of this film and Ants obviously being the first DreamWorks film. This was like the first proper, like, this caused DreamWorks. This film caused DreamWorks.
Mate, Pixar and DreamWorks were at fucking war when both Ants and A Bug's Life came out, because Jeffrey Katzenberg, who was the lead at DreamWorks, he was one of the big creative heads at Disney, back when Toy Story
And they
was.
both had the idea and the
Yeah.
rights and shit. Yeah.
Basically, Lasseter and Katzenberg were not happy with each other, and it was basically a war to see which animated bug film was going to come out first. And Ants did open first, and I do think it's actually a very good film in its own right. And compared to A Bug's Life, I would say Ants is the better film by default because I think it's just got a better script. But there's still some things to admire about A Bug's Life. I cannot deny that.
Yeah, I personally think that whole history and story of, how DreamWorks came to be and the Ants rivalry, that's probably the most interesting thing about this film, because it's not that memorable, and it's kind of a reason why it's, in a way, kind of faded into obscurity. Well, not exactly obscurity, but as far as Pixar goes, it's not talked about as much as anything else on the list that we're going to be talking about today. And there's a reason for that.
I think it was during that point when I sort of realised what the biggest problem with the film is, because when I look back at Toy Story, other than all its technical achievements, we remember all of its characters because they're so funny and memorable and charming. And I think A Bug's Life has a very good supporting cast with the circus bugs because, honestly, all of them are genuinely funny. But the biggest issue really just boils down to its main character, Flick. He's just sort of... When you compare him to Woody, who was sort of kind of like this egotistical cowboy that always cared about himself and slowly learned throughout the duality of Toy Story 1 that he had to sort of learn to accept who he is and, consider everyone else around him. Flick is one of the most generic main characters I think I've seen in an animated film, period.
Yeah, and it just does say a lot that I haven't seen either of these films for a while. I can vividly remember Toy Story and all these other films that I'm going to be talking about today, but I can't remember a thing about Bug's Life, really, apart from the vaguely what the story's about, and that's about it, honestly.
I mean, the story even in itself isn't all that interesting. It's just about a band of bugs banding together to defeat the grasshoppers. I mean, it's nature, I guess, but woo.
I think whereas Toy Story is an idea of, like, a really sort of generic idea done right, Bug's Life is a generic idea done generically. I think that's the best way to describe it.
There's one aspect to this film that I don't think's done generically, and that's just Hopper, played by Kevin Spacey, who is just a damn excellent villain, honestly. He's the best thing about the movie by a long shot, and not only because...
Yeah.
I think he's animated really well. He has like a very sinister presence. I think his character design's eerily creepy. Kevin Spacey does a really good performance, and I will even say this, like Hopper's fate at the end of the movie when he ends up getting eaten by a pack of birds. It's something that stayed engraved in my head as a kid. It's fucking dark.
Pixar, yeah, they do tend to do that, especially with these early movies. The next one, Toy Story 2, this film does actually go fairly dark and fairly sad.
I loved Toy Story 2 as a kid, but even as I started to grow up and, watched it as an adult now, not only do I actually think that it's a film that really lives up to its predecessor, because I'd argue it's an even better film because it introduces new characters that have great arcs, it expands upon its world. There's so much to talk about and really like here for so many reasons. It's a genuinely brilliant movie.
It is. It really expands upon the universe of Toy Story. It introduces the new characters that does that brilliantly. Gives Jessie the most heartbreaking backstory.
Oh,
I think
there's
you can have as a toy.
I never got the point of When Somebody Loved Me was when I was a kid. I rewatched the movie quite recently and I was blubbering. It was hard to watch, honestly, because now that I've become older and I realise that I've grown attached to a lot of toys that I had, and oh my god, this movie makes me feel sadder as a man.
And like, really, the worst fate as a toy really is just being forgotten about and just left there, just to watch under the bed as your owner grows up. Fucking, that's just mental.
Boy, are they gonna be in some shit for Toy Story 3.
We'll get to that. We'll get to that. Not this part, next part, but we'll get to that. Yeah, what else can we really say about Toy Story 2 that really hasn't been said already?
I honestly don't know. I mean, it's just it's just a really good sequel in its own right. It does everything you want. I mean, I do want actually want to talk about the villain, who's the prospector, who's voiced by Kelsey Grammer, and I have a bit of a love relationship, hate relationship with the prospector now because he sort of spawned this thing that Disney love to do now with the twist villains and all that. But
Yeah,
when you boil down to the meat of the story and how Woody's a collector's item and the Roundup gang's back and the prospector obviously doesn't understand or see the point in being played with because he's never been in his life. I really do get his motivations. Like, he comes across as this really nice guy, and the twist makes sense. It's justifiable. It makes sense in terms of his character arc. He's just a really great villain now I think about it, and it also helps that he's voiced by Kelsey Grammer because he has such a distinctive voice that can linger between friendly and sinister almost instantly.
yeah. Also, um, just because you touched on obviously Woody being a collector's item, I think that was a really sort of strong part of the film was when Woody realized he was way more valuable than he could ever have imagined, and that moment really just stay with you of like, holy crap, this is like he was massive back in the day, and he means something.
But at the same time, you have to consider that, like, at the end of the day, he has practically spent his entire life with Andy, and the film, in many ways, as he learns from Jesse especially, is that he has to come to terms that Andy will grow up and eventually neglect him, which is something that comes into play in Toy Story 3. But it's, at the end of the day, the movie's message is to basically enjoy what you have while it lasts, because I remember one of the final lines in the film being that Woody saying like, "Hey, I'll have my old Buzz Lightyear here to keep me company for infinity and beyond." And you know what? Looking back, I always enjoyed this movie a lot as a kid, if not for the fact that it was even more fun than the first movie. With a bigger world, more characters, still telling a good story on its own. But at the same time, now that I'm older and now I can kind of come to terms with what Woody's going through, and especially Jesse, I have such a whole new appreciation for Toy Story 3 that I didn't have before. It's easily in my top five favourite Pixar films.
It is fantastic, and obviously what I love about it really is obviously Toy Story. They started out Buzz and Woody hating each other. Toy Story 2, they're really good friends. Toy Story 3, what happens is Toy Story 2, it really comes to pass what could happen. Um,
Yeah,
but yeah, we'll get to that eventually, as I keep saying.
that's just all I need to say. Just fantastic.
Okay, so now we've got Monsters Inc., which I again think is fantastic. I mean, there isn't really that many Pixar films I think really aren't fantastic, but this one is it's such like a unique, quite a fairly unique idea. I know it has been done before, but it's never quite been done to this level, I think.
What really makes Toy Story work to me is, at the end of the day, the world building, because this is the first time that Pixar really had to think about, building a unique world of their own, because with the Toy Story films and A Bug's Life beforehand, they were set in realistic locations like a house or on an anthill in the middle of nowhere. But with Monsters Inc., they basically had to come up with this very vivid and unique world, a world where monsters, live, and at the end of the day, you have this factory where monsters basically go into children's bedrooms and their screams are turned into power, which basically supplies all their electricity and resources and so forth. And when you boil down to it, it is really fucking clever.
It really is. But I think really what steals the show for me is the fact that they introduce a character called Boo, who we never ever hear speak or anything really, and the how they build her up is just fantastic.
It's a genuinely heartwarming story as well, because it's essentially a story about a guy who's obviously Sully. It's essentially about a guy who's meant to take care of this kid, and this is a world where monsters are led to believe that children are toxic, and if you touch them, well, you're basically tented and you're fucking doomed to die. But at the end of the day, just seeing this character development with Sully and Boo, and just seeing them grow to love each other, and there's a lot of genuine heart to it. I will say that it has a bit of a predictable element to it because we've seen stories very similar to this before, but it doesn't change the fact that it's super, super charming as hell.
It really is. This film is just so great, and I think Randall, the bad guy, I guess. There's a few of them, but one of the bad guys, Randall. I mean, he's fucking brilliant. Let's be honest.
I think he's a bit one dimensional, honestly, but I cannot deny that he's brilliantly animated with this sort of chameleon style feel with how he can basically blend in with his surroundings and even his sort of character design, which has this really sinister, snakish look. It's a really cool design, actually. I will sort of admit this with Monsters Inc. It's not one of my favourite Pixar films because, yeah, I do think the story has a bit of a predictable element to it. But one thing that I think this some of the plot kind of copies a bit from Toy Story 2 with Water News. I mean, when you compare Water News' surprise twist villain reveal like the Prospector in Toy Story 2, I mean, do you kind of see the
It's
similarities
clear
there?
that sort of that's the inspiration, and that's sort of a direction that they will go on in the future. Because looking at the list, there's a fair few actually here where the good guy is actually the bad guy, kind of thing.
Yeah. And, oh boy, Disney Animation in particular have abused the shit out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the amount of films I've seen now, it's kind of become a bit of a generic thing.
But at the same time, I can't really deny Water News' motivations because at the end of the day, him and Randall were building this machine called the Scream Extractor because at the end of the day, even though they were getting enough resources out of children's screams, at the end of the day, screaming just isn't enough to them. They want more power. And so they obviously built this machine, which they were going to test on Boo. And at the end of the day, it's a very good metaphor for how powerful a lot of business people can be today, and just how sinister they can actually be. It's kind of spooky now I think
End of
about
the
it.
day, really, they're running a business. Their goal is to make money. That's just what they do.
I do quite like Monsters Inc. a lot overall. I
Yeah.
don't like it as much as other Pixar films because, again, it is a very predictable token plot that we've seen a lot of times before. But it's the uniqueness and of the world building and the vivid nature of the characters in the world that really does make it memorable. And it also helps that the voice cast is brilliant. Like Billy Crystal steals it as Mike Wazowski.
Right. Should we move on then? So the next film is gonna be Finding Nemo.
Find, Finding Nemo. If Monsters Inc. and Toy Story sort of built the foundation for what for what Pixar would become, I think Finding Nemo probably cemented it because it was easily at their time their biggest hit, and it was basically it was the first animated film to surpass The Lion King's gross at the time. So it was clearly a film that did struck a chord with so many people, and for good reason. I like this movie quite a bit.
It's it's a very good film. Very well remembered and very well liked for good reason. Honestly. Yeah, it's a real sort of heart. It's really heartwarming as well, and it really just kind of shows that sometimes there's got to be a bit more communication between a father and son, for example.
That's the overall heart and center of the story because this similarly to Toy Story 2, it was one of those films that I had a bit more of a upfound appreciation for when I started to grow up because the opening to the film was obviously when Marlin was with his mate and they were having like hundreds of little goldfish babies, and a swordfish obviously came in and killed her and everyone except for Marlin and the last remaining baby, which would be Nemo. And I never got that as a kid, and oh my god, it actually breaks my heart. I'm surprised at how dark it gets, especially for a G-rated
Yeah,
flick.
it's very dark, isn't it?
It's probably one of Pixar's more depressing films, if not for the fact that a lot of the movie is basically about a father trying to find his son, and there's a lot of very spooky situations they have to get into along the way, and get in terms of swimming away from sharks, having to go through a huge band of jellyfish, and even one point in the movie where Marlin actually thinks that Nemo got killed in the dentist office as well. I mean, holy
Yeah, that
shit.
that that shit really goes dark, and I think I just want to bring up how amazing all the characters in the film are that he meets along his journey. Like they're just so good.
there's such an amazing band of characters. I even have to talk about the Tank Gang as well, which is the band of fish that Nemo meets when he gets sent into the dentist office. Like, similarly to Toy Story 1, it's one of those films where you really do remember all the characters. Like, I remember Bubbles and Gurgle and Peaches and that other fish that was played by Willem Dafoe. I can't remember his name quite yet, but they're just a really fun presence. Similarly to the first Toy Story, it works on that same level. It's easily at the time their best animated, because Monsters Inc. was a film that sort of started with Pixar trying to experiment a bit more with that technology, especially with fur and skin. But Finding Nemo, I think, for Pixar was one of their biggest challenges, because, yeah, it was set underwater and they had to make sure it actually felt like a really dark, authentic ocean. But at the same time, they had to animate the fish in a way that, the actual fish would actually move. So they had to visit tons of aquariums, they went scuba diving, they had to take a whole bunch of research just to see how these fish move, and just, the physicalities and the weight of them. And when you compare it to everything else that came before, it's easily one of the best animated at the time. It gets trumped by the next film we're going to be looking at, but it's such a brilliant step in the right direction.
It truly is. But should we get to that film? Because it is the film that really inspired us to do this podcast.
Oh boy.
Fellas and bellas, ladies and gentlemen, Incredibles.
Oh boy. This, in terms of my top 5 Pixar films, is bang on at number 2. My number 1 spot is going to be shown off in part 2, but oh my god, The Incredibles. It not only works on such a fun, action-packed level, but as I grew up and I really started to, actually take a lot more time and attention into looking into a lot of the story and the characters, I'd argue it has one of Pixar's absolute best storylines, honestly.
Yeah, and I think really it's just a shame that we're not getting The Incredibles 2 when America did, just because apparently Disney thinks people in Britain want to see teams kick a ball around a pitch for an hour and a half rather than go and see their film.
And they decided to release fucking Patrick instead.
End me now. Yeah, football. yeah, lads, football's coming home, but The Incredibles fucking isn't. Okay.
Oh god, I do like The Incredibles. Is a huge benchmark for a few reasons. Because for one, it's their first film when they had to strictly focused on building human characters. Because with the previous films like Monsters Inc., Finding Nemo, Toy Story, all that lot, they focused on monsters and fish and toys, and for good reason. Computer animation wasn't that evolved just yet, and to be fair, that's because all the human characters they had at that point weren't that great looking. Like, I love Toy Story 1 to death, but the human characters look like shy now. But with Incredibles, it's the first time they had to, they actually had to animate fully human characters, prominently for the whole movie. And I think the way they were able to work around it so well and still make them look so good today is just down to some excellent character designs.
It absolutely is. Like you can just see Mr. Incredible, obviously hench ass dude, super strong, and you can see just massive good dude.
But that's what I mean. Like, every single character of the family are all sort of built by angular shapes. Like, you got Mr. Incredible, who has this muscular build. Elastigirl has a lot of like curvatures around her, which show off her elastic nature. And even like Violet, for example, she's a character that's meant to be like this very shy, introverted teenager. And one design choice that I think sells it fucking amazingly is just that they have a huge chunk of her hair covering one eye, almost to show her closeted nature.
Yeah,
it's not much, but a simple character design can tell you so much about a character.
The thing is, right, you can literally look at an Incredibles poster, and you can basically guess or have a really good idea of what the characters are going to be like just from that one little glimpse. Like you can say, oh yeah, that's Violet there. She looks not like the most
Shy.
popular girl in school. That's Mr. Incredible. He's pretty hench.
But even then, like, when I look into the story, I don't think it gets even near enough credit for what it gives for, because not only do I think it says a lot about our current society,
We live in a
but
society.
I think it just says a lot about the political landscape as well in many ways, because it's a story about how superheroes are basically banned after Mr. Incredible got sued for saving somebody who wanted to commit suicide, which is actually pretty dark territory for a Pixar film. And the way that it's
It is now that I think about it.
But the way that Pixar tells the story about how Mr. Incredible is going through a midlife crisis and misses the days when he was actually a super, and how he ends up taking a job by this woman named Raj, not knowing that he actually fell into the trap of a bad guy named Syndrome, who was actually once his biggest fan as a kid. And yeah, it goes into a lot of really shocking revelations throughout. A ton of stuff happens in it.
Yeah, it is mad just how well it's just all made up and how the story is told, as it were.
But even then, Syndrome might be one of the best written bad guys in cinema, period, because not only does he have a really great backstory, but his plans and motivations make sense, because he wanted to be a superhero just like Mr. Incredible, but he was just a regular kid in the eyes of everyone else, but his gifts came from his knowledge of science and how he was able to build so much technology, which was how he was able to grow this company and empire that he has. And it's just how his motivation comes into play when he basically built this Omnidroid and how he's progressively been killing all of these supers, all known throughout history, in order to basically show that he's the greatest superhero around, and how he's going to sell his tech to everyone, because when everyone's super, no one will be. It's such a great motivation.
He's obviously a big Rick and Morty fan. I think we can just say that.
Yeah, he has a very high IQ, so you can understand it perfectly.
Yeah. But yeah, really, in a sense, he is Tony Stark in a way, just evil.
But yeah, he's one of the best. I think he's just very well one of the best written villains, period. And in fact, Syndrome's arc in the film also links to Mr. Incredible's arc, because in many ways, when he was once a super in the good old days, he acted quite as selfishly as Syndrome did. And when he realizes later down the road that his actions in the past led Syndrome down a dark path, what if that means the same for his family? What if that means the same for the rest of the world? Because Mr. Incredible, for a good chunk of the movie, is pretty damn selfish and intentionally unlikable, but it just links into the overall message of the movie about how you're stronger with others than you are alone, which is why there's such a great message about family and just this great dynamic. And I could just go on and on and on about The Incredibles. It's fun, it's excellently written, brilliant villain, memorable characters. I think it might very well be the most perfect Pixar movie, save for one which I'm gotten later down the road.
Yeah. Honestly, just everything about this film is just brilliant. Just the family as well. I don't think we've really talked about, but the characters are just amazing.
Every single character goes through a certain arc, and it's all linked to how their powers make them fit into society. Like Dash was a character that he's obviously a huge sports geek. He wanted to partake in sports at school, but obviously because of his found powers of him being incredibly fast, it would obviously make him come across as a little unfair compared to everyone else. And yeah, you can kind of see the reason why he isn't partaking in sports, from a realistic standpoint, but emotionally, you kind of get him a lot. And I can say the same for Violet, because she obviously can't pick up the courage to actually talk to the boy he likes. Yeah, it is sort of melodramatic teenage high school angsty bullshit, but at the end of the day, considering it's all linked to their powers and how they fit in, I think it works well in its own right.
And a little fun fact, I named my first tortoise Dash after this film.
I was actually a bit of a huge Incredibles fan as a kid. I might as well tell you this now, actually. My bedroom was filled with nothing but Incredibles merch when I was a kid. I had a fucking Dash poster in there. I played the Incredibles game a lot, including Rise of the Underminer. I was probably the biggest Incredibles fan there is. I was then, and you know what? I still bloody am now.
So am I. But I think we've got to move on, because we've been rambling about Incredibles for way too long. Just Disney.
I could
Disney.
gush on.
I know that hopefully we can get this out on Thursday before the film comes out. But Disney, please don't do this again. Please give us the film. Who cares about football? Just give us the film. People aren't gonna be like, I'm not gonna see the film because I'm watching the football. Please.
I have a gut feeling in the back of my mind that I'm probably going to be let down by the movie a pinch, but I'm still thinking I'm going to have an amazing
I've seen
time.
a few good reviews for it. I'm looking forward to it. Probably going to see it day one or day two. Who knows? But yes, the next film that was released, a little bit of a step down. Cars.
Oh, oh no. This was a film that was quite infamous at the time for being what a lot of people considered to be Pixar's first stud. A lot of people didn't like it. I think it's a good movie, but I definitely think it's flawed.
I think honestly, it gets a lot more hate than I think it really deserves. Cars 2 is a different story. We'll get on to Cars 2 later on.
We'll get to that one.
That is Pixar's only dud in my eyes. Cars, it's really not a bad film if you look at it. There's a lot here to like.
I'll be honest. As a kid, I hated this movie because what really dragged it down for me at the time was just I thought the movie was really, really, really fucking boring. And to be fair, looking back as an adult, I can kind of see why, because at the end of the day, when you really dig down into the movie, it's essentially a underdog story about a racing rookie basically having to learn to slow down and enjoy life when he ends up being lost in this little town called Radiator Springs on the way to his race in California. And yeah, that does lead to my biggest problem with the movie, and that's just really the pacing. The pacing fucking sucks in this movie.
Yeah, I can see where you're coming from. I mean, yeah, it starts out all grand with a huge race, and then it just kind of goes, oh, okay, there's nothing else here.
I can kind of see where the slower pace can sort of. I can see what they were doing with the slower pace because, like, it is meant to give off this message about how Lightning just needs to slow down and enjoy life. And to be fair, to the movie's credit, they do actually get this message across really well because it's through how he was able to become friends with Mater, basically become friends with a lot of the inhabitants, and even has a romance kindled with this car named Sally in the movie as well. I can see where it's all coming from, but at the same time, Cars was made as a franchise for kids. Kids are going to be bored fucking senseless by this movie.
It was made to sell toys. I mean, and the amount of toys, Cars-related toys I've seen are ridiculous.
But thankfully, the movie's strongest aspects are the racing sequences, which is why the first act and the final act are easily the best parts of the movie. Not only because you can see you've learned so much about Lightning McQueen's character progression from his time at Radiator Springs, from how he was sort of a really arrogant arsehole at the beginning, from, how he was just seen as this rookie racer that can win any race, and even with his sponsorship, which was this oil company called Rusty's, which was, where he had to talk to a lot of his fans, which were just a lot of broken down old cars. He acts like an arrogant little prick in it, but when you see how much he's developed in that final act and, he's doing this final race where he starts to care about others and he even saves this Dynaco car and actually pushes him over to the finish line.
That for me, that for me was a mad scene because that was probably my favourite scene in the entire film where he basically just goes, okay, I'm not going to come first because you need to finish as well. Like giving up his first position where he was gonna finish. That was pretty beautiful. Not gonna lie.
Yeah, and also I need to talk about Chick Hicks, who was played by Michael Keaton actually, because he was sort of antagonized right at the beginning, but like I said before, during that final race, you do sort of realize that Chick Hicks was practically exactly like Lightning McQueen at the beginning of the movie. He was just an arrogant cock. Again,
he's how Lightning McQueen could have been, but isn't because he actually grew up and did some character development.
I will definitely say for a fact that Cars is a brilliant example of Pixar when it comes to strong character development. Again, I just think it really comes down to some really poor pacing and extremely predictable storytelling that just makes it a much weaker film than Pixar's other works, but
I want to say as well,
it's not that
Doc
bad.
Is a character I love in this film.
Yeah, he's actually a really solid character and one with a really great backstory as well.
Yeah, it is quite beautiful to see, especially when Lightning McQueen stumbles upon Doc's old wins, and it's just like, holy crap, you're Doc Hudson.
I mean, at the same time, Doc Hudson was a character that gave up as well. He everybody told him that he was no more and his racing career was ruined. this is a plot thread that goes a bit more in depth in Cars 3, which we'll talk about in part 2 and all, but at the end of the day, I will give the movie actually a bit more credit. Doc learns a lot from Lightning as well. They sort of back off each other very well. Doc learns how there's always hope in the world and how basically how there's still always a path in his way that he can always overcome. But at the same time, Lightning learns a lot from Doc about, obviously racing tricks and such, but how he just needs to keep himself a bit more grounded.
Yeah.
Oh my god, I actually realised I like this movie quite a lot more than I think it gets credit
Yeah,
for.
same. And there's one more little cool little thing that I like, and that is every car is based upon like sort of something quite like in real life. Like Doc Hudson is based upon the fabulous Hudson Hornet, I think it was called, which was a
Yeah.
race car back in the day, which just won, which had a very similar track record to Doc. It won a fair bit from what I can remember. And there's a lot of that sort of thing in the film. There's a few more references as well, which I just escape me now. But that one stuck with me because it's pretty clever.
If for those of you who've thought that Cars sucked, I'd honestly recommend probably rewatching it sometime because, yeah, it is probably objectively one of Pixar's weaker films because, again, I think the pacing drags, but there's still a lot of things to really like about it when you really get into the meat of the story. It's the same story that we've heard a million times before, but at least it's done to a very well
Yeah,
extent.
basically. Should we move on to Ratatouille?
Okay. I don't actually have that much to say about Ratatouille. I think the biggest thing to say is that it's actually the second film at Pixar for director Brad Bird. He came into Pixar to make The Incredibles shortly after he finished work on The Iron Giant at Warner Brothers. And if Brad Bird has contributed anything to Pixar, I think it's just the fact that he's a really good storyteller in his own right. And I think a lot of that translates well to Ratatouille. I think the movie has a few problems here and there, but what's good about Ratatouille, I think, is just done so unbelievably well in its own right.
It's a real sort of story about how Remy the rat obviously gets lost from his family and goes to Paris and just learns to be a chef. It's a great story.
It's a film about how great artists can come from anywhere. It's kind of like it's a film that I think can connect to a lot of people, if not for the fact that it's a film about creative people coming from places where doing creative things is kind of looked down upon, and how, like I said, talented artists can come from anywhere. It's like how a lot of people say that it's difficult to get into the film industry or the games industry or, culinary stuff that, Ratatouille delves deep into. But it's about how, yeah, talented people can come from anywhere. And that's what's seen in Remy's character because he's a character that has a strong sense of smell, and that's sort of connected into his love and affection for the world of cooking and basically cuisine and all that sort of stuff. And obviously, because he's a rat, his family looks down upon it. They just tell him to shut up and eat his garbage. They see use in his functions of a strong sense of smell since he can smell out stuff like rat poison and shit, but you do sort of feel for his character. I actually feel for his character
And it
quite a
isn't even
lot.
really just his family. Like, the world is basically against him, saying, "Oh, you're a rat. You're a filthy rodent. You're unhygienic. Get out of the kitchen." When really, all he wants to do is cook.
This movie actually has quite a few racist themes, actually.
I guess you can see
Oh,
it that
God.
way.
Oh, boy. But even then, a lot of stuff happens. It's just like The Incredibles from Brad Bird. Quite a lot happens in the movie. It's more than just about a rat making cuisine because it's all linked to a story about an unlikely friendship between this janitor named Linguini and how Remy's able to live out his dreams as a chef by basically hiding under his hat and controlling his arms by basically messing around with his hair, and how everybody's believing that he's a great chef. And then it's all linked to a subplot about how he's revealed to be the son of Gusteau, who was once this really renowned chef, but then he passed away, and then he was replaced by this chef who's just not very good and is kind of a prick. And how it's all linked into this critic named Anton Ego. A lot happens in this.
Ending part as well, where the ending part was when all the rats come and help out in the kitchen. That was beautiful. It really was.
My favourite scene in the movie is when Anton Ego actually tastes the ratatouille that Remy prepared, because it's not only just a great scene with how his life literally flashes before his eyes, and how this meal quite literally just sort of rekindled his love for fine cuisine. But at the end of the day, it just brings off this really uplifting message. It just shows how some of the most cruelest human beings in the world can actually grow accepting of others by just giving them a chance. And it's just such a brilliant message, and the ending. I don't think Ratatouille is one of my favourite Pixar movies for a few reasons, but I think it has easily one of their best endings out of all their films.
It's also got one of the probably one of the more infamous jokes in there of if I don't like it, I don't swallow.
Oh god. Ew. Anton Ego, what do you do in bed?
Oh boy. But yeah, it's just again, it's another really great film.
Again, actually, I need to give Brad Bird even more credit. Just like with Ratatouille, I think the movie works with many human characters just because they have great character designs, and that's because when you look at like Linguini and the head chef and all these different chefs and Anton Ego, these are characters that have very vivid images placed into my head because they're all designed in such an amazing, unique way. Like Anton Ego, he has this really tall presence and this really grumpy looking face. And, every single scene he's in, he's lit in a very dark fashion. Again, just amazing character designs. That's what I see in a lot of Brad Bird's films.
Yeah. I haven't really got too much to say really, but should we move on to a film that's easily in my top 5, possibly top 3, Wall-E.
Wall-E, yeah, of course.
Oh, I love this film. I mean, especially the first 30 minutes are. I mean, apart from the next film, which is the final film that we will be talking about today. I mean, the first 30 minutes of this is objectively brilliant, and if you disagree, you're wrong.
Wall-E was a film that I remember when I first heard about Wall-E, and it was when the teaser trailer first came out. I think a little while after Ratatouille opened, and I felt really intrigued by it because it just showed this story about a little robot looking to the skies and desiring a better life because he's this robot that's basically been, cleaning up a planet that's been abandoned for 700 years. And I will give the movie props. The fact that the first 40-odd minutes is nothing but, basically visual language and visual humour. It's a ballsy move, especially for fucking Pixar.
And another thing I've noticed, if you go back and rewatch it, is that actually not a lot of it is dialogue. They do not focus on dialogue that much at all in this film. It's just when it needs to be, and that's it. And that's what I love about this film.
Dialogue is a lot more heavily prominent once Wall-E goes off into space when they introduce like this captain.
Even then, it's minimum. That's what I'm saying. It's minimum even then because there's not a lot like.
I wouldn't say just minimum, but I think they're already really well written characters on their own. There's this one average character in the movie called John, who's voiced by John Ratzenberger, and he would have just come across as a regular guy, but because he's one of the few characters that we encounter in this story, and even he learns a lot from Wall-E and his sort of way of life. Yeah, even the movie takes the average Joe and makes him kind of a well-written character.
Indeed, like, just what they've done with this film, and it's also scarily quite real as well, because, we could end up just destroying the Earth and then going up into space, and then it's a scary thought, but it's definitely one that could be real in a few years if we don't change shit.
We live in a world where technology is everywhere and is constantly evolving, and we're sort of succumbing to the world of technology and entertainment and leisure as it is. And the movie in many ways feels like this dark Black Mirror-esque universe where it's just this grim depiction of our future. I mean, this is a world where humans have evolved to basically just be fat, lazy blobs. And, they're happy living the life of luxury on a ship in space, but the Earth that they lived on is left to rot just for robots like Wall-E to clean it up. And I think it's heavily implied in the movie that he's probably the last survivor on this planet as well.
Yeah, because obviously all the other Wall-E units had, by that point in time, just frazzled out and died. And then there's Wall-E, who has so much personality inside of it. And
I mean, It also links to the character Eve as well, and you know what? in a world where we get so many romantic comedies, I think Wally and Eve might have one of the most genuinely authentic romances in any film period, honestly.
I can agree there. Just it's also in the last 30 minutes how well the first 30 minutes, sorry, when he gives Eve the plant, she freezes up, and then he still tries to sort of make it work and try and spend time with her, even though she's not
He's
responding to
basically
anything.
fondling with her corpse.
Basically, you all ever heard her munging?
But I even have to talk a lot about the ending as well, because I can see how this relationship can work, because obviously Eve is probably the first being that Wally has seen in probably well over 700 years when the humans left, so I can see how it works on the level of how he just wants company, but I can see how Eve can kind of connect to him as well, because Wally's life is built in a way that Eve sort of kind of desires it as well, because she's a being of the future and technology as we know it. And even when we look into the ending of the movie, when Wally gets severely damaged and Eve manages to revive him, but in doing so wipes out all his memories and basically just becomes a default robot,
Yeah.
even then it kind of breaks my heart a
Now,
lot.
the ending of this film is brilliant as well. Like, brilliant.
I love how it ends in a very ambiguous way. The movie just ends with the humans coming back to the planet and starting to regrow a few things. And I like how it just sort of ends there. It sort of lingers on a really good question of, are the humans going to stay on Earth and rebuild? Or are we just going to leave it to die like it once again? The decision's up to them. And I think not only is it an ending that really makes you think a lot, but at the same time, it really encourages hope, which is something that I think Wally does really well. It is sort of a very environmentally friendly sort of movie in terms of its plot and messages and themes, which in other animated films like Ferngully is done in a really preachy and pretentious way, but Wally does it in a way that's not pretentious but more less to say human.
Indeed. But yeah, like I said, really, like not every film I don't think has to be just right, just has to answer like every single question. I think some films can just end on like, will they, won't they? It's up to you to really make up in your head whether or not it's going to, and I do like that a lot.
It's and it's thought provoking and challenging as well. And I'll even give Wally even more credit. The movie's fucking funny.
The movie is brilliant in that sort of regard.
The visual humor of the movie, just Wally doesn't have much to emote, just his eyes and how they just sort of tilt just to show off different emotions and things. But it works in such an amazingly humorous level. Like, I remember one scene where Wally opens up an escape pod on the ship and Eve just sort of follows him in, and he basically just gets up on a seat, and then he just stares at Eve and just plants his hand on the seat next to him, kind of signaling her to get up on the seat as well. That is hilarious.
There's a lot of stuff done in this film, despite how they don't really use audio and stuff. It's amazing just how funny you can make a film. Just silent humor. It's brilliant.
I heard Pixar did actually watch a lot of Charlie Chaplin and silent films to try and get this across
I can
really
imagine.
well. And you know what? It shows it well as well.
Yeah, I can believe that actually, because there is something quite Charlie Chaplin about Wally, in just the way it's done.
Yeah, I can see where you're coming from there. But yeah, I don't really have that much to say about Wally. It's just a fantastic flick. I think it's just barely out of my top five, just barely, but considering it's a challenging film on its own about, about the way of life, what the future could be if we're not too careful, and, just showing off a bunch of encouraging and challenging themes that really do say a lot in the grand scheme of things. It's a film that I think may very well remain timeless.
I can see that. I can really see this film really getting better with age and stuff, and it's amazing. It's just really good to me.
Okay, shall we talk about Up?
Oh, Up, the one of the other films in my top five, and again
This is movie's probably at my number 4 spot.
yeah, the first, the first segment is just done is basically perfection. It just is.
It's it's 9 minutes of some of the best cinema, period.
I mean, literally, you could just end it there and people will be satisfied because,
I
oh
think
my
that's what
God.
Doug Walker said about the movie on Disney December.
Yeah, exactly. And he's right. Really, he is right. I mean, they could have made it short, ended it there. People would have been happy.
I look at Up in a very similar way that I do with Wally, and that's in the sense that the idea, when you really come down to it, is a very strange one and again another ballsy move for Pixar because where Wally sort of took a very ambitious idea of trying to tell a large chunk of the movie just entirely with visuals, Up basically took the idea of basically making a movie around probably the most abstract of ideas she could think of, which is just a house floating in the air. And somehow, some way, they managed to not only make it work, but work on such an emotionally powerful level as well.
It's because really the main character, you can just see how depressed he is nowadays because his wife is just gone, and meeting up with obviously the kids, and at first obviously him being just so like miserable because he doesn't really want to get close to anyone anymore.
It's because it's implied in the movie that his father passed away, and I like how they never explicitly tell you that either.
Exactly, yeah, like because obviously you see at the end he's the person given the badges in the scouts. It's not his dad.
Yeah, like it's that one scene where like Carl and Russell were like carrying the house in the middle of the jungle in the middle of the night, and he was like, "Hey, do you go camping with your dad anymore?" And he's like, "Well, not outside." Or like it's very subtle, but just from even just the way that the characters look at each other, you just sort of get it. It's so
Yeah,
subtle, but it's done so well.
yeah. It's also just how he goes from just hating Russell to them, just how their relationship builds up throughout the film. It's brilliant.
It works in a very similar way to Sully and Boo in Monsters Inc. actually, and that's also kind of convenient because the movie's directed by Pete Docter, who also directed Monsters Inc. as well. So even from an artistic level, and even as ambiguous level of monsters and a house flying in the air, you can see a lot of that same sort of visual flair between those films.
You really can. You really can.
But I even have to say more about it because the movie's also linked with, you know, like the character Charles Muntz and how Carl and Nellie sort of built a romance out of their love for this person they idolise, and how they obviously wanted to travel to Paradise Falls because of it. I would have bashed the movie a bit, you know, with Charles Muntz being the bad guy, but honestly, in context of the story and its message,
It makes sense.
it works really well.
It does
Like,
make sense.
stupid,
It does.
because in many ways, Carl was obsessed with Charles Muntz. He had an obsession with him that he still had up until they encountered him. And Charles Muntz always had this obsession with trying to capture this really rare bird, which happens to be Kevin Leighton down the road. And you can, and in many ways, to Syndrome in The Incredibles, you can kind of see how basically Charles Muntz is a character that he's basically what Cole Fredrickson could have been if he chose a different path. If you kind of get what I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, obviously that's like Pixar sort of reusing previously made ideas, like
Yeah,
obviously with
but it
Cars.
works.
It does. It works very well. It's a very, very, very well thought out and well done film, and I give it props for that.
Yeah, it's just a really emotional story as well because even Carl and Russell's like relationship together, it very much mirrors this life that Carl used to have with Ellie before she passed away. It's very similar to The Incredibles, where it has that sort of that message of being with somebody makes you stronger, but it's done in a bit more of an emotional level. And even just this one scene towards the end, done with absolutely no dialogue, where Carl goes through this old scrapbook that Ellie had and how he realized that later down in life, as they were starting to grow old and, you know, their dreams of going to Paradise Falls were fading, she still kept updating the scrapbook up until her death, and she just left him a final message before she died saying, "I've enjoyed my adventure. I hope you have a new one." Oh my fucking god, I'm gonna cry.
Literally, just hearing that again gave me goosebumps because my God,
Oh, and the
it's just
soundtrack. I love a lot of Pixar scores, but I think it's next to Inside Out. I think Up might have the very best music score out of any Pixar movie. It's not much; it's mostly just piano melodies, but
It works.
the way that it controls its mood. They have this they have this married life theme in the movie, which is like da 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 da, but they do it in many different ways, and in a nostalgic way, in action themed way, in a sad way. Next to Inside Out, it's my favorite Pixar score.
Yeah, I can definitely see why it's very memorable. I think next to like sort of the Incredibles theme, it's probably one of the most memorable out there.
Both of those movies were scored by Malco Cicchino, so if anything, it just proves that he's a really talented guy. I'm gonna cry, mate. Man. Yeah, that's all I can say about Up. It's one of my absolute favourites for a reason. Brilliantly animated, beautifully told, takes some familiar themes but does them in new and inventive ways. It's one of the closest things to a perfect Pixar movie.
Yeah. I think that's probably gonna have to do it for this episode. I'm afraid. The next one will be up whenever we we finish it. I'm not gonna make any promises anymore.
Yeah, we'll be sure. Don't worry about it.
Yeah. But no, this is obviously part one. There will be a part two. Don't worry about that. So until then, I've been Ned.
I'm Kyle, and thank you and good night, peeps.
Yep. We'll see you next time. Goodbye, everyone.
Cheerio.